Coronavirus 2019, shortened to COVID-19, is an infectious disease caused by severe acute respiratory coronavirus 2, shortened to SARS-CoV-2, or the agreed-upon term, coronavirus. Coronavirus is, as the name says, the virus, and COVID-19 is the disease or condition caused by the virus. While more research may be necessary, the consensus among most experts is that this is a zoonotic spillover, the transmission of pathogens from non-human animals to humans. Scientists presently believe that coronavirus came from bats originally, and is now transmitted between humans. People in the United States may be more familiar with zoonotic transmission through swine flu, as various outbreaks over the past century or so have their origins within the borders of the U.S. The Donald Trump administration, for months, denied the problem, then when faced with the inevitability of the problem, denied culpability in the lack of preparedness and misinformation. Then, to make matters worse, Trump himself shifted the blame and gave his right-wing base a new target. I don't have all the answers, but let's look at what's been going on, and you can judge for yourself. In April 2018, the officials tasked with directing a national response to a pandemic were removed from power in a move to consolidate authority under National Security Advisor John Bolton. Rear Admiral Timothy Zimmer suddenly was gone from his post, leading the Global Health Security Team on the National Security Council. Tom Bossert, a figure calling for comprehensive strategy against pandemics, was also fired. This set the stage for our current level of preparedness. On January 22, 2020, President Donald Trump was asked about the coronavirus at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland. Days prior, the first case of the coronavirus was detected in the United States. Trump remarked, "No, not at all. We have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China, and we have it under control. It's going to be just fine." On January 30th, Trump had still not called for a national emergency or for emergency funding or anything else within his power. At that time, he remarked, "We think we have it very well under control. We have very little problem in this country at this moment. 5. And those people are all recuperating successfully, but we're working very closely with China and other countries, and we think it's going to have a very good ending for us." On February 10th, Trump told reporters that the coronavirus would go away by the spring, an unfounded claim that was refuted by Center for Disease Control Director Robert Redfield only days later. Trump repeated his springtime prediction on February 14th anyway. On February 26th, he made a speech at the White House in which he claimed that positive tests would begin to decrease. A bizarre prediction, immediately countered by other people within the administration. On February 27th, Trump claimed that it would all disappear, like a miracle. The President of the United States is granted so much power and so much prestige that many will believe him instead of the experts. There is a great deal of data that suggests that Trump's misleading words about the coronavirus has led to irresponsible social interaction, lack of social distancing, and increased cases. Ryan Bort of Rolling Stone recently wrote of this, "It's true that there's only so much the administration could have done. The problem is that it didn't even do that." This is one of the problems with granting so much power to so few people and placing a monolithic figurehead atop a vertical hierarchy. By February, even a cursory glance at the lockdowns and progression of cases in other countries should have been enough for the administration to take this seriously. But even as February turned to March, Trump told Fox News that he did not believe the World Health Organization, calling it false, and that the coronavirus was actually very mild instead. It's important to note that this is not simply a case of Trump being wrong, because every politician who parroted his words or showed him support was just as complicit. At one of Trump's rallies full of misleading information, Senator Lindsey Graham appeared and defended the president's words. Days later, Graham was forced into quarantine over what was at the time a suspected coronavirus infection. Finally, on March 13th, Trump declared a national emergency, but by then, there were over 2,000 cases in the United States. As of this recording, there are now over 20,000 cases, and by the time anyone listens to this, almost certainly many more. Now that Trump and his cronies have been forced to admit the problem and actually try to do something about it, Trump has changed tactics and has tried to claim that he always knew it was a problem. On March 17th, he told reporters, "This is a pandemic. I felt it was a pandemic long before it was called a pandemic. I've always viewed it as very serious." This does not line up with literally anything he said in January, February, or early March. Now that denial hasn't worked, Trump, his cronies, and his friends in right-wing media are trying to deflect responsibility. Here are the naming conventions for the pandemic, straight from Mother Jones's Style Guide. The coronavirus, officially SARS-CoV-2, is a virus, not a disease, and the disease it causes is COVID-19, or coronavirus disease, deriving from coronavirus disease 2019. COVID-19 is also called the coronavirus disease. It's not accurate to say the virus COVID-19, that's the disease. Phrases to keep on hand: COVID-19, the disease caused by the coronavirus. The coronavirus, which causes COVID-19. This also lines up well with the World Health Organization's naming conventions. Yet, despite the seeming simplicity of this, Trump has attempted to sway the public toward calling it the Chinese virus. The viral pandemic has run in parallel with a social pandemic, general xenophobia, and specifically anti-Asian racism.
Do you think using the term Chinese virus, that puts Asian Americans at risk, that people might target them?
No, not at all. I think they probably would agree with it 100%.
This has hit the United States of America in particular due to Trump's pre-existing hostility toward China, previously calling climate change a Chinese-made hoax, his suggestion of strategic tariffs against China throughout his administration, among other things. The U.S., which at first criticized China for failing to contain the outbreak, is now failing to control the outbreak within its own borders. Trump himself has been called out for firing important health officials and for attempting to cut funding to the Center for Disease Control. The CDC was thankfully funded by Congress, which overruled Trump. He has also been called out for delivering the aforementioned misleading information to the public that has undoubtedly been unhelpful at best and dangerous at worst. Asked about these unassailable truths, Trump said this.
Well, I just think it's a nasty question because what we've done is, and Tony has said numerous times that we've saved thousands of lives because of the quick closing. And when you say me, I didn't do it. We have a group of people. I could ask perhaps my administration, but I could perhaps ask Tony about that because I don't know anything about it.
Faced with a number of critics who have put the outbreak at Trump's doorstep, he tried a new tactic, almost certainly suggested by his advisors: blame China and racialize the pandemic.
Before I address the efforts that we've been engaged in to push back against the Chinese virus.
Are you on board with the President calling this China virus, Chinese virus? Does it seem like that's helpful right now to call it that?
That's where it came from.
But is it helpful? It alienates people. It sort of sends tones like there's someone to blame, that there is a group of people to blame.
Well, I think China is to blame because the culture where people eat bats and snakes and dogs and things like that, these viruses are transmitted from the animal to the people, and that's why China has been the source of a lot of these viruses like SARS, like MERS, the swine flu, and now the coronavirus. So I think they have a fundamental problem, and I don't object to geographically identifying where it's coming from.
Because then it's connected to Asian Americans. The Asian Americans are feeling like it is a racist thing.
Oh, I disagree.
Suggestions from Fox News and individuals like Meghan McCain repeat Trump's misdirection that it is not racist or inaccurate to call the pandemic the Chinese virus because China was its place of origin, and that referring to the place of origin is common in naming a disease. This fails to acknowledge several things. First, the naming of a disease after a group of people may be common, but its frequency does not make it any less racist. It used to be common to name a disease after either its place of origin or people of origin, but this pattern was often done as a means of misdirection, a means of othering people, and often either inaccurately or through purposeful scapegoating. This is nothing new. It is quite literally medieval, as the Black Plague was frequently blamed on the Jewish population. Jews were accused of deliberately poisoning the wells and causing the plague. As a result, many Jews were killed, either by being buried alive or burned at the stake. In the United States in particular, blaming a disease on an ethnic group or specific population has been common for centuries. The 1832 and 1849 outbreaks of cholera were blamed on Irish immigrants and African Americans, the latter of whom were still in bondage in southern slave states. The state, the media, and local businesses suppressed information due to the risk of fleeing from towns, which was bad for business. Blaming the cholera outbreaks on black people and the Irish had the intended side effect of blaming the disease on the poor, as this obfuscation intersected racism with classism. In the 1830s, some venereal diseases like syphilis were mislabeled as a black disease, which led to inhumane treatment of African Americans during the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. During an outbreak of smallpox in San Francisco in 1876, a population of approximately 30,000 Chinese living there became scapegoats. San Francisco's Chinatown was blamed and quarantined, despite limited evidence. This helped sway public opinion against Chinese immigrants. The Chinese Exclusion Act, the first immigration law based on race, was enacted in 1882. The vaccine had not been fully tested or made safe, so the Chinese immigrants were used as human test subjects, which led to adverse health effects for their community. In 1982, in the early days of the HIV/AIDS epidemic, the condition was called GRID, Gay-Related Immunodeficiency. In short, yes, it is common to name a disease after groups of people or places, but it is not done dispassionately or with neutrality. Racists covering for Trump by citing examples like Singapore virus and Middle East respiratory syndrome are only proving the pattern of racism, not disproving it. Second, it is actually not standard operating procedure to name a disease after its place of origin anymore. In 2015, the World Health Organization actually mandated new diseases should not be named after places. This is because everyone knows the consequences. So no, it is not the naming convention, which means Trump naming it the Chinese virus is absolutely not simply a case of following guidelines. It is actually a case of violating guidelines. Thus, Trump's introduction of a new and more pointed name for the pandemic must come with an agenda, a purpose, and it is completely transparent what that purpose is: scapegoating. Photojournalists even snapped pictures of Trump's speech in which he crossed out Corona and wrote in the word Chinese. It's not some neutral phrase if the White House is going out of its way to violate WHO mandates and replace the real name. Brief instances in which CNN called it Chinese coronavirus notwithstanding, the names for both the virus and the condition caused by the virus were quickly adopted. If we already have a name for something, the introduction of a new and more hostile name is not a case of accidental racism, and the only people naive enough to believe so are people predisposed to be willing to believe it, and or enthusiastic about spreading this name to cover for the administration's failures. Comparing this attempt at renaming the pandemic the Chinese virus to the Spanish flu shows not only a purposeful ignorance of the historical effects of blaming a population, but also a specific misunderstanding of the Spanish flu. Most contemporary historians and scientists understand that the Spanish flu actually originated in the United States, specifically Kansas. It is predominantly right-wing politicians who are spreading the name Chinese virus and Wuhan pandemic, and at least in one case, the Kung flu, It should be noted that zoonotic infections have occurred in the United States, such as the aforementioned swine flu outbreaks. But this politician only sees Chinese zoonotic infections as disgusting and exotic because he's a racist, and he knows he can get away with racism, especially in this particular social climate. The consequences of calling the pandemic the Chinese virus will almost certainly lead to more hate crimes against Asian Americans. In addition to this being unacceptable for obvious reasons, there is also another layer of ignorance to this. Asian Americans are just as susceptible to the pandemic as any other Americans. They are not instigators, they are victims, the same as anyone else.
Tony, about that, because I don't know anything about it. I mean, you say we did that. I don't know anything about it.
You don't know
We're
about
spending,
the,
no,
about
I
the
don't know.
reorganization that happened at the National Security
It's the administration.
Council.
Perhaps they do that. You know, people let people go. You used to be with a different newspaper than you are now. You know, things like that happen.
But this was an
Please go ahead. We're doing a great job.